Hi there, this is Miles and welcome to Creative Circuit. This is part 1 of my Adobe Starter Kit, starting with Adobe Photoshop. To start off, we're going to go to New File. It doesn't really matter what document we start with, but I'm going to go straight to change this to millimeters. Make sure this is on pixels per inch. We're going to make sure we're on RGB color, 8-bit, white background, square pixels. And then in the width, we just put 300, and in the height we'll also put 300 with 72 pixels per inch. When we create our document, it should look like this. Now, basically, we're going to have the default essentials layout around. Now, you can customize this by going to Window and bringing in certain aspects. So, for instance, if I wanted to bring in the history panel, I just click this, and it brings in the history panel. However, I personally use a different layout. So in my case, I'm going to go to Workspace and go to Miles's Workspace. And that opens up all these different panels that I use. If you want to make yours look the same, it's all very easy. You just need to open Window, go to the thing that I use. So for instance, Properties panel on the right, and then you just click it to add it. And then once you grab it, it'll be out like this. Just grab the top and you can customize it. Pull it out even. Use this little arrow to collapse it. Drag this onto the side. You can even move it up to be on the same line as this one. And then these will come out together. However, I like the history panel up here, right next to properties, where I can sort of drag this down. Fantastic. You can make your workspace look exactly the same as this, or you can customize your own workspace to see what works best for you. While we've got this document open, I'm just going to go over some quick things with you. So, first of all, let's just grab a brush. I'm going to turn the size up to, say, 20 pixels. You can go bigger or smaller. This isn't really that important. We've got the hardness up to full and the spacing down to basically 0. We're just going to draw a line. It doesn't need to be a good line, just a line. And we're going to zoom in on this line. And to do that, you can press Z, and that'll bring you up to the zoom tool. And then if you click and drag left and right, it'll bring you in and out. If you press V, that brings you back to the move tool, which is on here. Also, I should mention the zoom tool is down here. All of these will have key assignments to them. I would recommend that you learn these if you want to use them effectively. Alternatively, we can zoom in by holding the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on a Mac, and then use the scroll wheel of your mouse. If you scroll forward, it'll move you forward. If you scroll backwards, it'll zoom you out. What's interesting about this is that it also looks at where your cursor is pointing. So if I'm pointing my cursor at this part of the line and hold Alt and scroll, it'll zoom me in there. However, if I move it over here and scroll in here, it'll scroll me here. So we've scrolled in far enough now where we can actually see the pixels. And what I just want to illustrate is that Adobe Photoshop is first and foremost a photo editing software. It's not built for vector graphic creation or publication. It is built for editing photos. However, it can also be used for light illustration and light animation. Later in this series, I will also be going over other software that accomplish other goals within the Adobe software suite. Okay, next I'm going to go over layers with you. So let's zoom out back to bring our canvas here. Also, if you hold space, you can grab the hand tool, and then if you click, you can drag and then let go. This is great for moving your canvas around. On the layers panel down here, as you can see, we've got our background layer and where we've drawn this line. Now, I'm going to unlock this layer so that it's free to use. We're going to press E, and that's going to bring up the eraser. We're going to bring the eraser size up to quite big, 50 pixels. Hardness on max and spacing to 0. And we're just going to put an eraser through it. Now, if you look, it hasn't actually just erased the line, it's erased the background as well, and that's because this background is filled in with white. So if we zoom in, we can actually see this little checkered pattern is the symbol of nothing. So this is saying that there's nothing here, and we've actually erased the white. So what we can do in this situation is go up to our history panel, and if we just click back, that gets rid of that. And if we click the brush tool, and go to New, that got rid of the brush. Now, what's good about the history panel is if we don't change anything now, we can actually go back to that state. However, if we go forward again and I do something else, it's created that eraser pattern, so we can't go back. So I'm going to unlock the background again, but this time I'm going to go down here and I'm going to start a new layer. So I'm going to click New Layer. And what's interesting now is if we press B and go to the brush tool, we're going to draw some lines again. Now this is on a different layer to the background. So I press E again for the eraser tool and draw a line. It's only going to erase this part of this layer. So what you can do then is keep this background layer as a background and keep this layer as something that you're editing or working on. So let's undo this again. We're going to start a new layer. We're going to unlock this one. So if we go to the shape tool over here, you'll probably have rectangle by default. However, you can right click and choose any shape you like. I'm going to just go with circle for now, an ellipse. Also, this should be on black by default. I'm not sure which way it will be, fill or stroke in black, but I'm going to bring the stroke down to 0 and I'm going to make it empty, and I'm going to change the fill to black. And I'm going to draw the circle. Now, if you hold shift while you do this, it'll lock the circle to be perfectly circular. And I'm going to let go, and it's going to create a black circle. Now, even though Adobe Photoshop isn't a vector software editor, this is actually a vectorized circle. Now, we couldn't move this because the layer wasn't selected, so we're going to make sure that the layer is selected when we move this. And while we move this, we can sort of make sure that it fits in the center. And if you do Control-T or Command-T on a Mac, it will actually open the free transform mode where we can pull it from certain points and edit it. This can all be undone by doing Control or Command-Z, which is the same as doing it on the history panel. So with this circle now, it's actually a vector object, which means we can make this as big as we want or as small as we want. So if I do Control-T, and I'm going to hold Alt and Shift, I'm going to drag it up, it's going to get plenty big. And if we scroll and zoom in, it hasn't distorted at all. It's stayed fairly, fairly sharp. So if we shrink it again, however, this time we're going to right-click on the layer, and we're going to rasterize it. And when we rasterize it, we've basically told the software to flatten it. It's no longer a smart object or a vector object. It's now a raster object, which means that it is flat. So as you can see, it is how it is now. And if I do Control-T, Command-T, scale it up, and double-click, as you can see, now it's started to distort. So with this raster object now, there's a few things we can do. Firstly, we can select certain aspects of it. So I'm going to use the Marquee tool, and I'm going to drag a section of it. Now, if we go back to the Move tool, again by pressing V or by clicking on it, we can move this section of it. If we do Control-Z, I can undo that. Alternatively, I can do Control-C, open a new layer, do Control-V, and I've got a new part of it, which is hard to see against itself. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to undo it again. Alternatively, we can change this selection by doing the Marquee tool and just clicking once, and it'll get rid of everything. There's also similar marquee tools, such as an ellipse marquee tool, which lets you do a circular part. And these single row marquee tools, which I don't use very often because they only select one pixel, either horizontal or vertical. Next, we've got these selection tools. We've got the lasso tool. So if you click, hold, and drag around, and then let go, it will create a section with any shape of your desire that you draw. And then there's the polygonal lasso tool, which if you click, creates another selection for you. Now those are all the main selection tools. However, there is one more. If you press P and open up the pen tool, you can click a few points, This is very similar to the polyagonal lasso tool. However, it's a bit different. When you've got these points selected, you can hold Control or Command and drag each point individually by clicking on it once and then click dragging it. So I can edit the shape that I want to select. Also, if you hold Alt or Option, and then click and drag, you can create a bend. So you can create these very interesting shapes. And then you can do right click, make selection, new selection, and OK. And that'll create your selection. And then when you've done that, you can also click more points, right click, make selection, add to selection, do that, click more points, right click, make selection, subtract from selection, and then it will subtract from that zone. That's pretty much all the selection tools. Also, if you do Control or Command D, it'll deselect any selection zones that you've already clicked. Okay, for the next part of the tutorial, we're going to need an image. So I'm going to close this actually, and I'm not going to save it. And we're going to go to the internet. And this website that I use, Unsplash, has a lot of free images that we can use. So I'm just going to type in field. And we're going to have all of these images available to us. And what we're going to want to do is go to license, and we're going to want to make sure it's free. You can also sort by orientation here. So if you want landscape or portrait, we're not very fussy about that. So I'm just going to scroll down till I find an image. And this one looks quite nice. This one is to Savo in Africa. And we're going to want to download it into our downloads folder. So when I minimize this, I'm going to open my downloads folder and I'm going to have it here. Right click on it, open with Adobe Photoshop. That's going to open the image in Photoshop. So if we look at this image from a distance, we can see that we're at 25% zoom here. However, if we zoom in, it's going to zoom in and we can start to see when the logo starts to pixelate. Now, if you can see these little squared zones around, they're quite hard to see. That's image compression. So that's where an image has been a certain size and it's been either shrunk, enlarged, or just been on the web for a really long time to the point where it's compressed. Compression helps with images file size. So if you put an image on a website and you need it to be smaller, compressing it usually will help with that file size. Compression also happens just actively through files existing, especially with JPEGs because they are considered lossy. So over time they'll get more and more distorted. However, this can take years upon years upon years. So with this image, we're going to want to do some edits to it to show you what's available in Photoshop. So let's unlock it as the background layer. Now, we could create layers on top of it and start doing things on top of it. However, the edits that we need to do need to be on the layer itself. Since we're in the latest version of Photoshop, we're going to have some options available to us that you may not have on earlier versions. This is Photoshop 2024, so if you're on an earlier version, some of this may not be available to you. However, most of it should be. So, I don't know about you, but when I zoom in here, I can sort of see some stuff like this bird flying across. There's a little white dot here. You may not want these in your image. In the photographer's case, he may actually be okay with this, but for our case, we're just going to go pretend he wasn't. So, in here, we've got the spot healing brush. If we right click, we've got the spot healing brush, the remove tool, the healing brush, patch tool, content aware move tool, and red eye tool. For our cases, we're just going to stick with the healing brush. Now, what you do with the healing brush is that you hold Alt or Option and you choose a point. I'm going to click over here. And then when you zoom in, anything that you click now with the brush will draw it from that area. So as you can see, we're drawing it and it's just copying that area. So that bird now has been erased using part of the mountain. It also works if I clicked on the sky with Alt and then move it here. It's going to recreate the sky, but it's going to try and blend it in, so it's not going to do a very good job. Now if I undo this, you can also use normal or replace. So if I click on it here and then draw it here, you can see there's more of a line around it, which means that it's just drawing it and not blending it. So usually we're going to want to use normal. Now the problem is with this is you have to be quite precise and know what you're doing. So alternatively, you can use the spot healing tool. Here's a little trick if you're on Windows. I'm not sure if this works on Mac, but if you hold Alt and hold right click and move, you can actually make your brush bigger and smaller. So we're going to use this, and if we click it, it's going to just draw from the image itself. Now what it does is it scans the whole canvas to see for similar objects, and then it tries to work out itself what it should do with it. So in some little cases, like little beads of grass, it does a really good job in removing them. However, on bigger things, if I start drawing some lines here, it's done a fairly good job. However, some of this is quite distorted, so we're going to undo that. Now, if you want to remove bigger parts of an image, there's a way of doing that too. So if I press L, it'll bring up the lasso tool, whether you use polyagonal or the normal lasso tool. I'm just going to use the normal one and freehand it. And say we want to get rid of this tree, this acacia tree. Going to start drawing a line around it. Make sure we get all the little branches in this as well. There we go, we've drawn around it. Now we could get even more specific by zooming in, holding Alt and removing parts that are fine. However, you could spend a lot of time doing that. Sometimes it's worth the time. A lot of the times it won't be worth your time. So I'm going to maybe just go around quickly for any unnecessary bits that I've done. But it's not 100% did. So we've got our tree outlined. There's a few options we can do with it. Number one is we go to Edit, we can go to Fill, we can use Content Aware. You can leave all this alone and just click OK. Now, what that's done is it's done the same thing as the spot healing brush. It's drawn from the image and tried to fill in what it thinks should be there. And most of the time, this is pretty good. However, if we look at the clouds and the blending between this sort of silhouette in the background, we can see that the clouds have crossed over here and it's stitched up by the sky. And you can sort of see, if you look from a distance, it doesn't look quite right. Most of the time it will do a great job. However, some of the time it's not going to do a great job. So let's undo that, bring the tree back. Alternatively, this is where you would need the latest version of Adobe. You can use Generative Fill. A Generative Fill sources from Adobe's own image library, and it is powered by artificial intelligence. So if we go to Generative Fill, we can click Generate without typing anything, and it's going to do the same thing as Content Aware, but rather it's going to use AI instead of just using the image, as well as its own data set. As you can see, that's done a much better job of getting rid of the tree, and it's even made the mountains look even more natural. And it's given us 3 variations, so we can do this one, we can do this one, or we can do this one. Now, they all look fairly good. I'm going to go with the middle one. And I'm going to click into the layers section. Now, as you can see, we've got 2 layers now. The top one is actually the image Generative Fill. So I can disable that by clicking the little eye dot. And as you can see, it brings the tree back, and we can re-enable it by clicking the eye. Now, the funny thing is, if I disable the background, you can see where it's filled in. So let's bring that back. So between that, we're going to use the spot healing brush again. We're going to get rid of the bird, that little dot. We've actually cleared this area fairly well. So now that we've got this empty canvas, we can take these 2 layers. We're going to highlight them both by pressing Shift and clicking on both of them. Then we're going to do Control or Command J. And that's going to duplicate them. Now, what I'm going to do with these bottom two, I'm going to highlight those again. I'm going to put them in a folder. Call them group 1. You can just call them original. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse the folder and I'm going to hide them. So they're still there. It's just we've hidden them. Now these two, I'm going to click and highlight them both. I'm going to right click and I'm going to merge them. Merge layers. Now that's turned those two layers into one layer. Now there's advantages and disadvantages to this. The advantage now is that we can edit where the tree was and it's not going to interfere with those two layers. However, the disadvantage is that this is now a flat image that we can't undo from. So that's why I'm suggesting that you save the previous layers as backups. Now with this empty canvas, there's a few things that we can do. We can obviously make some color edits. So if you open the adjustments panel, that'll be under Windows still. We can start adding some filters to it. So let's go with hue and saturation. If we click that, it'll add a layer on top. And we'll close this panel. We can see that we've got some new settings under properties. Now, if we change the hue, it's going to change the sort of the colors. Make some really interesting looking stuff. Make it deeper, make it purple. I'm going to bring it back to default because I don't think we need to change any of those colors. However, the saturation is something that's interesting to mess around with. This basically changes the strength of the colors in the image. So if we bring that all the way down, as you can see, it starts making the image black and white. Bring it back to the middle. However, if we start bringing that up, it starts to dial up those colors a lot. And if we bring it really far, it overbakes the image and makes it look terrible. So in this case, let's make it a little bit more green. Maybe like 10. And then we're going to want to desaturate it a little bit, say like minus 25. Now we've created a fairly interesting looking image there. Remember, this is just a layer on top of that generative fill layer. So if we deselect this, you can see what it originally looked like. Now let's get rid of this layer, hue saturation, and let's just go over some other adjustments. We've also got brightness and contrast. If we click that and add that in, you can see the brightness and the contrast. We're going to make it look quite atmospheric. Delete those. The levels. Now this helps the color levels. So this is like the shadow levels. So if we pull this middle one, it adjusts fairly evenly. If we pull one from the left, it makes the lights lighter. If we pull from the other side, it'll make the darks darker. Let's get rid of them. And we've got exposure. So we can use this to expose the image. This is good if you've got a dark image and you want to start bringing out some of them details. However, this image is fairly well lit already. For us, we don't really need to mess around with these too much, but I just thought I'd make you aware of especially like the levels and the exposure. You can close this now. So with this image now, we want to start making some interesting little edits to it. Let's pretend that we've got this empty image, and where the tree was, we're going to want something there. So this is where we can start using the AI generative fill. If I press M to open up the marquee tool and start dragging a big circle in the middle, rectangle, and go down to say here, and click generative fill. This is where you can imagine anything. So in this case, we're going to type in camping tents. And we're going to see what this generates. As you can see, it's generated some tents. However, I would argue that it's not done a very good job here. These look fairly bad. As you can see, the AI has attempted to make like these little ripples in it, and it doesn't know where any of it's meant to go. We don't know what these lights are or anything like that, so I'm going to undo these. And I'm going to try something else. What about a castle? It's created some really interesting looking cool castles. Not necessarily very African, but we'll just go with this for the moment. Now obviously AI is a very powerful tool. However, it's not the be-all and end-all. This shouldn't be a way that you can create stuff from scratch. This should be a way to assist you in creating stuff from scratch. So, for instance, now that you've got this castle, if you look at these parts of it, those are all jagged and wrong. This is a bit flat. The shape is all wrong. So this is where you want to start making edits of your own. This is not the final product by any means, and I would never put this out for a client. However, since we don't have all the time in the world, we're just going to go with this edit for the moment. Now, if we want, we can start bringing in some of these adjustment layers again. I'm going to go with hue and saturation. Make this a bit green or a bit more orange maybe. We're going to saturate it up, desaturate it, say desaturate to 25. Made it look a bit gloomier. Exposure, we can change some of the exposure elements of the image. Gamma correction, we can make it very like silhouette-esque, or we can make the color, the brightness pop. Let's bring that right down. Lastly, on this image, we're going to want to go over a little bit of typography, but not too much. So if you press T or click on this tool here, you've got typography. And there's two things you can do here. You can either just click once and it'll add some text that you can start typing. Or if I undo that, you can click and drag and create a text box. Now in this situation, we're just going to click once. However, I am going to change the font. I'm probably going to use something like Helvetica New. The character color, we're going to put it up to white. And let's say just with bold. And we don't want it to be too big. Let's go with 150 point, only because this image is quite large. Okay, if we click once, we'll type in TSAVO, Savo, let's pop it up again, 300, so you can go to 500 point, click, move this around. There we go, we've got the text in. This text is still editable, so if you double click it, you can change certain aspects of it. Put exclamation point or whatever. Now as you can see, it's center aligned, so if we do Control or Command A to select it all, we can do it left aligned. This is where we'll have to move it back to the corner. We can also do Control T to scale it up. And if we want this text, we can right click, we can rasterize it. If rasterizing isn't an option, like it is here, alternatively you can just create a new layer, highlight them both, right click and merge them, and that'll turn them into a raster object. And then you can edit these by simply grabbing and pulling parts out of them. However, we're going to undo that so that it's not a raster object. As well, we've got blending modes. So if you click on here, you can drop this down in the layer, make sure you've got the correct layer selected. And if you hover over these, it should show you what they're all going to do. Some of these may do seemingly nothing, but they're all doing something. These aren't very useful for this specific circumstance. However, if you mess around with it, you may find certain other uses for them. If I go with soft light and pull this up, pull it into the sky. It's quite interesting. I wouldn't necessarily say it's good design, but it's interesting to look at nonetheless. There we are, and we've created a little sort of, edited image here. So this is quite cool. If I highlight all of these and put them in a folder, call them edited, I can deselect these and reselect this. I'll even turn off the generative fill. And now we can see what we've done to the image. There we are. So we've created this image now, and let's pretend that we want to export it. There's a few ways of doing that. So if we go to File, we can go to Save a Copy. I'm going to choose to put this on my desktop, and I'm going to use JPEG. Now, like I said earlier, JPEG's lossy. However, PNG will inflate your file size and is much better for simple monocolored graphics. So JPEG it is. save it as a JPEG. We'll give it a new name. We'll call it Tsavo. And we'll just click save. We'll put it up to maximum quality. However, if you're designing for web, you may want a smaller quality. And we'll go with OK. And there we are. We can see that in Photo Editor now, our JPEG. If you want to save a design file and save all the layers, all you need to do is save as to the desktop and make sure it is a PSD or a Photoshop document. So we're going to say, let's call this Tsavo as well. Maximize compatibility. I'm going to click the little cross here. It's going to go. And then all we need to do is find where we saved that item. That's the JPEG. We want to find here's the Photoshop file. We're going to double click it. And it's going to open it again. Fantastic. Before we end this tutorial, there's just one more thing I want to go through with you. So we're going to open our browser again. And this time we're going to go to a site called GraphicBurger. GraphicBurger is a really interesting site that is fantastic for doing mockups for your designs. So this could be for logos, it could be for photography, it could be for lots of different things. In my case, I'm going to show you an example of creating a little sign for your logos. So let's go here and let's type in sign. And there's some different signs here, some rustic looking ones, some very sort of antique-y looking ones. We're going to go with the simple one at the top here. I've already downloaded this since this takes a while to download. Close this. Here it is. It's already a Photoshop document, so I'm just going to double click it. It should automatically open in Photoshop. And there's a little M logo in the middle, which is quite nice. Now, whoever's created this file has created it with a smart object here. So all we need to do is double click in the middle of this little icon, and it should open it onto a different layer. Not a different layer, sorry, a different tab. So what we can do now is bring in an item. So in my case, I'm going to go with the Creative Circuit logo. I'm just going to drag this in to the middle. I'm going to scale it up. I'm going to say 1200 pixels. Double click it. And we can disable the placeholder one at the bottom. And if we do Control S to save or Command S on a Mac, go back into the original tab, as you can see, that's been brought in as a little object. So you can see that that would be like a shop sign if you had a different logo. A GraphicBurger is amazing because there's so many items that you can search for. For instance, if you want to put something on a t-shirt, lots of t-shirts. Type in a frame, put your photography in a different frame, you can show a client what that would look like. Or even if you were designing an app, you could even show what items are going to look like on a phone. So there we have it. That concludes part 1 of the Adobe Starter Kit, starting with Adobe Photoshop. Now, if you could leave me a like, that would be fantastic to grow this channel since I've only just created it and I have got more videos on the way in the same vein. Thank you for stopping by. Links to the sites I've used are in the description, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.